She had just closed the diner when they appeared. Wrong time, wrong place, overhearing the wrong conversation. And what those three arrogant gangsters did not know was that the shy server they snatched was the wife of a man whose name once made the entire underworld of the Deep South tremble, a man whom, in the dark, criminals dared to call by only one name, the Ghost of New Orleans. And he was about to remind them why some names are only ever whispered in fear. The battered sign above Lou's Diner on Highway 11 flashed twice, and then went completely dark. Claire Reynolds did not mind her boss had promised to fix that sign 3 years ago. She quietly wiped the last table, her worn sneakers whispering on the black and white tile, and hummed an old wordless tune she could not remember the name of. It was 11:47, 13 minutes to midnight, and then she could go home. The diner sat tucked on a lonely stretch, where the lights of Baton Rouge were only a pale smear in the distance, a familiar pit stop for long-haul drivers, night walkers, and sometimes those who did not want to be recognized. Claire had learned not to ask questions. She smiled, poured coffee, and collected tips silently. Tonight felt too quiet, almost unnaturally so. There was only one table occupied, 3 men in suits who entered as if they had wandered into the wrong movie. They sat deep in the darkest corner, where the dim light and the hiss of the coffee machine could not mask the clipped sentences Claire happened to overhear. She did not listen on purpose, but in the hush of the late-hour words like deliveries arriving on Thursday, Dock 7, 20 kilograms drifted past her like a curse. She pretended to be deaf, blind, an invisible waitress simply doing her job. They left close to midnight. Claire breathed out, counted the tips under the harsh fluorescent light, $42. Not bad for a Tuesday. Calvin would laugh with happiness as if she had won a lottery. He always cherished her work like she was keeping a portion of their soul. He was probably asleep by now, an arm thrown over the pillow she had yet to lie on. He slept better when she was beside him. Claire pulled on her coat, turned off the lights in each section, and stepped outside. October air kissed her cheeks with a chill. The parking lot was empty, except for her old Civic resting beneath a pallid street lamp. She fumbled in her bag for the keys, her breath fogging the cold night. She heard nothing until a black SUV materialized as if from the ground, skidding across the gravel and stopping behind her car, blocking every escape. Claire froze, her heart stuttering, but she kept walking. Maybe they only wanted directions. 3 men stepped out. She recognized the suits from the diner, but this time their eyes were harder, their steps more definite. The leader looked about 30, his hair slicked, his arrogant smile never reaching his eyes. "Good evening, sweetheart," he said in a syrupy, counterfeit voice. Claire tightened her grip on the keys. "The diner's closed. We're not here for coffee." He moved closer. The other 2 fanned out, shaping a triangle around her. "Problem is, you have ears that are too big for a quiet server." The blood in Claire's veins congealed. "I don't know what Dock 7 is, or what's arriving on Thursday, or what 20 kilograms means." He repeated each phrase exactly. The trouble with roadside places like this is the staff overhear things they shouldn't. "I heard nothing," Claire said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm just doing my job." "Maybe, maybe not." He tilted his head, looking at her as if she were an odd insect. "But we can't take chances, can we?" It was not a question. Before Claire could scream, one of them lunged from behind and clamped a hand over her mouth. Her keys clattered to the pavement, metal striking concrete. She thrashed, kicked, elbowed, but the 3 men were stronger, quicker. "Easy now," the leader said, producing a cloth soaked with chemicals. "We don't mean to hurt you. We just need you quiet for a few days while we finish our business. Think of it as a little vacation." The cloth pressed to her face. A sweet, wrong, dangerous odor rolled over her. The last image in Claire's mind was of Calvin reaching for her in sleep, and the cold dinner she had left in the oven. Then darkness took everything. The Civic sat silent under the streetlight, its doors closed, the keys glinting on the concrete. The diner sign blinked once more and died. At 6 o'clock in the morning shift found the car and called the police to report it abandoned. But by then Claire had been taken to a warehouse nearly 50 kilometers away, waking with her hands tied behind her, the smell of rust and old oil stinging her nose. At the same time, Calvin Reynolds stood in their kitchen, staring at the still warm stew Claire had left. The phone ringing. An unknown number lit the screen. He opened the message with hands that did not tremble, yet something cold crawled down his spine. "We have your wife. She heard too much." Don't call the police if you don't want her to disappear forever. Wait for instructions. The sender did not know they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. They did not know that the gentle man who kissed his wife goodbye every morning, as if she were the most precious thing in the world, once carried a name. The underworld spoke only in whispers. The ghost. He had burned criminal worlds to ash for far less than this. Before we move to part 2, if you are still following this story, tell us where you're listening from, anywhere in the world. Leave a comment below to let us know how Claire and Calvin's story touched you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like and share to hear more dramatic and emotional videos every day. Your support allows us to continue telling breathless journeys, like the upcoming second part when the ghost of New Orleans awakens, and anyone who dares touch him will pay. Calvin stood motionless in the kitchen, the pale yellow light painting his solemn face and well of eyes. On the counter, the pot of beef stew Claire had prepared before work remained warm under a sheet of foil, beside it a note in her familiar handwriting. Warm at 350 degrees. If I'm not home, eat first. Love you. She always left such notes, small, gentle, ordinary, as if they would never vanish. But now the house was too quiet, the air thick and suffocating. Calvin had called the diner twice with no answer. He had driven there at midnight, circled the empty lot, found the lights out and the doors locked, yet Claire's silver-gray Civic sat where she had left it, as if she'd never left. He had meant to stop, but something in the air made him turn the car home. It was not fear, but the intuition of a beast that had spent years in deep woods. When the message came, he did not flinch. It was only a line from an unknown number with no greeting. "We have your wife. She heard too much. Don't call the police if you don't want her to disappear forever. Wait for instructions." He read the words over and over without blinking, then very gently set the phone on the kitchen counter. His next movement was deliberate, as if entering a ritual already prescribed. He walked the hallway and turned into the bedroom. Everything remained where Claire had left it, the blanket half thrown across the bed, the soft yellow night lamp, the wedding photo from 10 years ago on the bedside table where she smiled radiantly while he looked at her like one looks at the moon. Calvin pulled open the wardrobe, fingers skimming her neatly hung dresses, until he found the familiar hollow. A soft click sounded as the panel swung open. In the recess lay a dark metal box, old but solid, its 3-dial combination lock intact. Calvin turned the numbers and opened it. First came a heavy gold ring engraved with 3 claw-like slashes across a mask, the mark of the ghost. He slid it onto his right ring finger, where it had rested for 20 years before he removed it to live a quiet life. Next was a worn leather notebook, its spine soft, thick with names, addresses, and codes, not phone numbers, which change, but these, which did not. Within its pages was the underworld of an entire region of the South, once under his cold, ruthless control. Finally, a black and white photograph, slightly blurred at one corner. 6 young men standing in front of a warehouse on the outskirts of New Orleans, the man in the center with arms folded across his chest, not smiling Calvin at 31, his eyes already colored by dried blood. On the back, scrawled in blue ink, "The Judgment Council, New Orleans, 18th of June. Calvin closed the box but kept the notebook and the ring. He returned to the living room, sat down with his back straight, staring into the space for a few seconds, then opened the notebook, found a particular page, and dialed a number. The person on the other end answered on the first ring. "My God," a man's voice whispered, scarcely believing his ears. "Calvin? Is that you?" "I need information," Calvin said, his voice low and even, devoid of feeling. "A group of 3. They kidnapped a woman from Lou's Diner near midnight. I want to know who they are, who they work for, and where they are. Within 12 hours. You really came back?" "I am not coming back," Calvin cut in, his voice a breeze but enough to make the listener shiver. "They took my wife. I am coming to get her back." Then he hung up and rose. The ghost ring tapped the edge of the wooden table, a harsh metallic sound echoing through the quiet kitchen. The ghost had awakened. Someone was about to pay. Before Calvin Reynolds vanished from the underworld's map, people called him many names, but the one that made even the most powerful flinch was the ghost of New Orleans. No one mentioned him in meetings, no file bore his name, and if anyone was forced to speak it aloud, they did so in a whisper, as if afraid he might hear from someplace the darkness had never shown its face. For Calvin did not kill loudly, he made them disappear. No blood, no bodies, no explanations, just a morning when a family would wake and discover that the father, the brother, the boss, who had shaped their lives, simply no longer existed. No one knew exactly where he began, only that in the late 1990s, while gangs in New Orleans still fought for every street, every dock, every alley, a quiet man with ash-gray eyes stepped into the game, requiring no proclamation, no guns, using only information, blood debts, and fear until the three largest crews quietly withdrew from the city within 6 months. First came the disappearance of the entire Beaumont family, 12 people. Every branch and root vanished from their mansion by Lake Pontchartrain as if they had never been. Then the O'Connell Transport Corporation woke one winter morning to find all their freighters, warehouses, bank accounts and legal papers transferred to shell companies in Panama overnight. No one saw Calvin arrive, no one saw him leave, but the consequences were as plain as high noon sunlight, and that was when people began to call him the Ghost, because he did not need a reputation, he needed results, and results meant no one dared resist. In 2008 he formed the Judgment Council, 6 men, each a corner of the Gulf's network of power. A hacker, a lawyer, a financier, a former cop, a shipping boss, and he the invisible hand that coordinated all of them. And once a week they met in an abandoned warehouse south of New Orleans, where security cameras malfunctioned with uncanny regularity and cell phone signals always dropped at meeting time. No one outside that circle knew how the decisions made there toppled the narcotics, arms, and money laundering networks across the South. Then one June evening, Calvin noticed a waitress named Claire in a small diner on Highway 11. She poured him a cup of coffee, her hand slightly trembling as if she recognized him from some photograph or the rumors everyone knew but none dared to check. And instead of stepping away, she asked him if he wanted cream, an ordinary question that cut through the cold armor he had built like a blade. After 3 months, he returned to that diner weekly. After 6 months, he withdrew from the Judgment Council. After 1 year, he disappeared. No announcement, no farewell, no trace. Some said he was dead. Some whispered of betrayal. Others swore they had seen him reading in a little library in Missouri. But in everyone's depths, the understanding was the same. If he were alive, better never make him reappear. Claire was the reason he let go, and now Claire is the reason he has returned, not to reclaim a throne or power, but to take back the only woman who once saw the human part of him and chose to love him for it. What they did not understand was that when a man who once controlled an empire chooses peace for a woman's sake, if she is harmed, the whole world will pay. Calvin closed the metal box and slid it back behind the wardrobe panel, then walked into the living room where the silent phone lay dark on the table like an omen. Inside him, everything was clearer than ever. There was no room for hesitation. It was time for darkness to answer darkness, and the ghost would appear again, not to threaten, but to finish. Claire woke amid the smell of rust, oil, and cold dust that clung to her throat. She lay on a cracked concrete floor, her wrists bound behind her with plastic ties, one cheek swollen from where it had struck the car seat when they shoved her inside. The only light came from a flickering bulb overhead, casting a sickly glow across the hollow, freezing emptiness of an abandoned warehouse. She did not know how long she had been unconscious, only that her last memory was the leader's voice, as the engine roared to life, the radio blaring while he whistled as though it were a joyride. They hadn't bothered to wear masks, and that terrified her more than anything, because if they planned to let her go, they would have hidden their faces. But these 3 didn't care what she saw, and that could mean only one thing. They didn't intend for her to survive. Outside, the metallic groan of a sliding door yanked her back from thought. Someone was entering light footsteps, not the leaders, not the brute who'd knocked her out. This one moved slowly, uncertainly. Claire held her breath. A shadow appeared at the edge of the light. Young, slender, wearing a dark hoodie, holding a water bottle and a protein bar. She lifted her head. Their eyes met. He hesitated a second, then came closer, unscrewing the cap and bending down. "You need water," he murmured, his voice small, awkward. Claire watched him silently, then gave a faint nod. He slid a hand behind her neck, steadying her as he lifted the bottle to her lips. She drank in tiny sips, her throat burning with dryness. "What's your name?" she asked after the last swallow. He blinked, surprised that she wasn't screaming, not begging. "Ethan," he said, staring at the floor. "I'm just on watch. This isn't my thing." "Then why are you here?" Claire's tone was quiet, almost a whisper, free of blame, just one human speaking to another. Ethan was silent for a long moment. I needed money, he said at last, still not looking up. I've got a little sister, Sarah. She's sick. Long-term treatment. Regular jobs don't cover it. Rico said one run would pay for 6 months of medicine. Rico, the one with the slick hair? Claire asked. Ethan nodded. You shouldn't know his name. I already do. Don't worry, Ethan. I'm not going anywhere. She managed a small smile, though pain tugged at her mouth. Ethan looked at her, meeting her eyes for the first time. Something in her gaze unsettled him. She wasn't afraid, or she hid it too well. I didn't think it would go like this, he said softly. Rico said they'd just scare you, then let you go. But Mike doesn't think that way. Claire didn't press him. She understood. 3 men, and only one still carried a scrap of conscience, the one standing before her, caught between right and wrong, between saving and walking away. Ethan, she said hoarsely, what do you think I am? He hesitated. A waitress, who overheard something she shouldn't have. Partly, Claire nodded. I'm a wife, and I'm certain right now my husband is doing everything he can to find me. Ethan pressed his lips together, almost smiling but afraid to. If your husband calls the cops, they'll kill you before the police get close. Calvin won't call the police, she said, meeting his eyes steadily. He doesn't need to. Who is he? Ethan asked, the first flicker of real curiosity in his tone. Claire was silent for a heartbeat. He used to be someone frightening, but he left it all behind to live quietly with me. So if I disappear, he won't panic. He won't rage. He'll do one thing, only find whoever did this, and make them regret it. Ethan swallowed hard, fingers tightening around the bottle. He glanced down at her, then turned toward the door. Before stepping out, he stopped, not looking back. I'll come back later, he said, and vanished behind the heavy metal door. Claire leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes. She didn't know what was happening beyond these walls, but she believed in Calvin. No guns, no shouting, no haste. He was always a man of patience, and if he was coming, then nothing would stop him. Not Rico, not Mike, no one. Calvin sat in the car with the engine off, the dim streetlight bleeding across the windshield and casting his silhouette like a silent smoke across the dashboard. An old phone lay on the passenger seat, its screen showing a list of contacts with no names, only strings of numbers remembered in a language of his own, each number a door that opened onto a memory, a ledger of power he once used to hold a world beyond the reach of law, and he pressed the first one. The line rang only twice before a man's voice answered, hoarse but alert. Anyone calling at 2 o'clock in the morning must have a life or death reason. And Calvin replied with 2 words, low and steel, sure need to meet. Then a pause, a soft breath, and the reply, 15 minutes, the old doc. And he hung up. The man was Marcus DeWitt, once his right hand on the Judgment Council, the logistics man who handled supply chains and cleaned up transactions without leaving a trace. And the old dock was the collection point they had used. The last time Calvin stood there was more than 8 years ago. Yet 17 minutes later they met in the dark. Marcus older now, flecks of gray in his beard, wearing a brown leather coat, and still the habit of gloves even when it wasn't cold, asking no questions, and only nodding as though a midnight call were an inevitability. How many? Marcus asked, and Calvin said 3. A leader, a brute, and a hesitant kid, and that they had taken Claire. And Marcus balled his fist, a fury in his eyes without words, how to proceed, and Calvin shook his head. No killing, not yet, a soft strike first. I need Ray to collapse their finances, Big Lou to handle logistics and rumors. No one moves before, I say. Marcus tapped a line and sent it. 2 hours and Ray and Lou will be there. What's the kid's name? Ethan, Calvin said. Appears to still have reason. Then use his reason against them. And they parted without embraces because their past required no sentimental rights. And on his way back, Calvin stopped at a surviving payphone booth near the shanties, dialed Ray, who once threaded money through a dozen layers of shell companies, and answered with a laugh like gravel. I thought you were dead, he said, and Calvin told him not yet, and now make someone feel like they're about to die. Rico, Mike, Ethan, cut the funds, lock the accounts, seize the goods, cancel the shipment. I want them bled dry before they feel the pain. Any time, Ray asked, and Calvin said the first 6 hours make them panic, the next 12 make them desperate. Ray nodded, and Calvin knew the game had begun. Then he called Big Lou, the man big as a wardrobe, with contacts across depots, warehouses, and especially street-level informants. Lou asked Little, "What do you want spread?" And Calvin said this. Rico betrayed his superior. He touched an unauthorized shipment. His men grabbed the wrong person, and there is someone coming back to clean up. And Lou laughed like a man who hadn't heard such a delicious rumor in ages. "People will lose sleep tonight," he said. "Good. Don't let anyone sleep until I find Claire." And Calvin hung up, standing alone in the neon flickering phone booth like a pulse in the dark. Once he used this network to enrich himself, to punish, to control. But now he needed it to save one person. And because that person was Claire, every rule became negotiable. And when a man who once moved the underworld chooses to return, not for power but for love, everything he touches will be changed. No one knew he was coming, and when they realize it will be too late, Rico woke to the incessant buzz of his phone on the bedside table. It was still dark, and the clock read 3:18 in the morning. He sat upright as if the device had been ripped from his body. 42 missed calls, 12 unread messages, an email from a supplier in Houston with the stark subject line, "We cancel the transaction, no explanation needed." He opened the first message. "Mike, the warehouse in Baton Rouge lost power. All cameras down. Alarm system offline. Goods, not yet unloaded." The next was from the finance manager. "2 main accounts frozen on suspicion of money laundering. The lawyer is out of contact." The third came from an unsaved number. "I advise you to disappear for a few days. Someone is looking for you." Rico punched the wall so hard his knuckles bled onto the wooden floor, but he felt no pain. He leapt for his laptop, the internet stuttering, everything slower than usual as if someone were watching each click, and on his shipment tracking board, 2 containers had vanished from the GPS. The screen flashed, and a message appeared like a nightmare at midnight. "Touch her, and you will not live to see the morning." Rico shivered, baffled. Everything was fine last night. Money arriving on time, shipments ready to go, just a worthless waitress. Nothing to worry over, yet now his whole network felt as though someone were unscrewing each bolt. Mike entered without knocking, sweat beading at the nape of his neck. "No contact at the port," he said, eyes darting. "And Ethan, he's gone." "What?" Rico croaked. "He was assigned to watch the girl. You said he wouldn't think for himself." "I know, but he wasn't at the post. The camera shows nothing, as if he was never there." Rico threw the phone onto a chair. "This is not random. Someone is playing us. Someone very skilled." Mike nodded, panic written plain in his gaze. "And very well connected. 3 suppliers canceled orders simultaneously. The lawyer isn't answering. And this morning, 3 of Lou's men, the city handlers, also quit. More precisely, they were forced out." Then Rico understood. Not the police, not the FBI. This was the kind of operation only one man could orchestrate. Someone people once mentioned in whispers. Someone presumed dead or at least gone from the game. Mike looked at Rico, his lips trembling as if he dared not say the name. "Is it him?" Rico turned away but did not deny it. In his mind, the image of the man with ash-gray eyes rose up, the man who once ran the southern New Orleans port. With a nod, he swallowed. "Impossible. He vanished 10 years ago." "But what if it is him?" Mike pressed. "What if the girl is not just a waitress but someone important?" Rico said nothing. He remembered Claire's eyes as she'd been bound and shoved into the car. No sheer terror, no screams, but a calm, certain look, as if she knew someone would come, as if she believed absolutely that the person would not merely find her, but make every hand that touched her fall. At that moment, the window of Rico's room shattered and a small object flew in, landing on the wooden floor with no explosion, no smoke, only a heavy gold ring engraved with 3 claw-like slashes across the image of a mask. Rico staggered back, his face ashen. He had seen that symbol in an old photograph and had been warned that if it appeared, one should drop everything and flee. But now it was too late. The rumor had spread, and the underworld stirred. The ghost had returned. No one knew from where, no one knew how. But as transactions vanished, accounts froze, and links in the shipping chain fled like rats from a sinking ship, all anyone could do was pray. Rico backed away, cold sweat soaking his shirt, hands trembling. He had lost control, not because of the police, but because he had unwittingly declared war on a ghost. And in this world, waking a ghost is never a wise choice. The metal door gave that familiar, heavy creak and pulled Claire awake from a fitful half-sleep of hunger, cold, and the lingering tang of rust. She opened her eyes slowly to the dim bulb, throwing a pale wash across a face. moving nearer Ethan. The same thin frame, hesitant footfall, carrying a thin blanket and a small paper bag that smelled of cold bread and canned milk. Claire said nothing, only looked at him, her gaze softening, less taut than before. Ethan set the bag beside her, crouched, and worked at the plastic ties around her wrists. "Only while I'm here," he whispered. "If you scream or try to run, I won't help you." Claire nodded. Her wrists were raw, a few thin lines of blood. He handed her a strip of gauze and a fresh bottle of water. She pushed herself up slowly, breathed, and took a careful swallow. The silence between them was dense but not oppressive. Claire knew what she must do, not plead, but give Ethan a chance to see he still had a choice. "How old are you?" she asked softly. Ethan looked up, surprised by the question. 23. "Too young for this work," Claire said, watching him, "but old enough to know where it leads." Ethan tightened his fist. "I never planned on this," he said. "Just a watch." Rico said no one would get hurt. And now he's hidden me in a warehouse, cut communications, tied me up like cargo. "Do you think when they're done they'll let me live?" Ethan fell silent. Claire continued in a gentler but firmer voice. "You have a little sister, Sarah, yes?" Ethan flinched. I never told anyone her name." "You did," Claire said, nodding. "The first time you gave me water." Ethan bowed his head. "She needs treatment. This is the fastest way." "Fastest isn't always right," Claire said. "My husband, Calvin, once chose the fast road too. He turned away from it. If you help me now, you might get a chance to turn away before things spiral." Ethan gave a bitter little smile. "You don't understand. I have no one else to help. Rico pays cash, no paperwork. He asks only for silence." "And what is the price of that silence, Ethan? An innocent person erased? A child growing up with a brother's name tied to a kidnapping?" Ethan froze. Claire could see him sway, still a boy wrapped in grown-up skin, a life that had forced him toward shortcuts. "I don't blame you," Claire added, her voice lowering. "I only want you to see that if you do nothing, you become part of what is wrong. Even if you don't strike or give the orders, you know, and silence is a choice." Ethan looked at her for a long time. The warehouse held only the distant clink of chains from some dark corner. At last he whispered, "Do you think he will come?" "No," Claire replied, her eyes bright with an unshakable certainty. "I know he will come." Ethan nodded slowly, rose without another word, and moved toward the door. Before he left, he paused and withdrew from his pocket a large gauze pad and a small tube of ointment, setting them on the floor beside her. "I'll be back in the morning," he said in a voice like wind. "Trust no one else, especially not Mike." Then he slipped out, leaving Claire with a small, fragile thread of hope that would keep her awake through the night. She hugged the blanket to her chest, her palms still stinging, but her heart warmed a little. Ethan might not be a savior, but he was the first crack in the frozen wall Rico had built, and where a crack opens, light will find its way in. Calvin stood motionless beneath a drizzle, fine as silk, the yellowed beam from a towering crane gliding across his impassive face. The southern docks of Baton Rouge were usually alive with the grind of engines, ship horns, shouts, and the rumble of forklifts carrying containers. Yet tonight everything was eerily silent. No workers, no vehicles, the port sealed off by a technical malfunction, whose real cause only Calvin and 3 others knew. Out of the darkness, Marcus emerged from behind a cargo crate, raincoat to his knees, gloves spattered with mud. "Ray's taken over the coordination network," he said. "Every container tied to Rico's group is flagged as under suspicion. The inspectors are coming, but it'll take them days to realize there's nothing there." Calvin nodded, his eyes fixed on a dark blue container marked with the fake shipping company logo Rico used for his runs. "And manpower?" he asked. "Big Lou's pulled everyone out of their logistics chain. No one's loading, no one's receiving. The rumors already reached New Orleans. People are afraid to be caught in it." "Good," Calvin said, turning to him. "Do they have any shipment ready to move?" "One, tonight, headed for Mobile. Trucks will load it 5 miles from here." Calvin gave no reply, only a signal. 10 minutes later, that truck vanished from the radar, as if it had never existed. No gunfire, no chase, just drivers who, for reasons of their own, suddenly decided not to finish their route. One empty container was left behind in a flooded field, a void worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and a dozen questions without answers. At 3 a.m., Rico received a photo, his container tilted in the mud, doors flung wide, not a single crate inside. No caption, just the image, but anyone seasoned in the underworld needed no words. It was a warning, and it would not be the last. An hour later, his internal network was hacked. All burner phones dead at once. Encryption cracked in under 2 minutes, leaving a flood of junk texts repeating the same phrase: stop or disappear. Rico smashed his computer, tore the battery from his phone, ordered a sweep of the area, but no trace was found, no footprints, no cameras, no sound, as if darkness itself had swallowed his roots. Mike was unraveling, demanding they move Claire, but Rico hesitated. He was starting to suspect Ethan, though without proof, and every choice now could be fatal. Meanwhile, in an abandoned break room behind the old warehouse, Calvin sat across from a short, gray-haired man in a checkered shirt, Jim, the liaison between private transfer stations. "You sure about this, Calvin?" Jim rasped, his voice rough with smoke. "If you show your face now, those bastards will know you're still alive." "I don't need to hide anymore," Calvin said. "They touched Claire." Jim exhaled, pulling a memory card from his pocket. "This is a recording of a call between Rico and a contact in El Paso. He's trying to dump that shipment at a loss. I think he knows he's losing." Calvin took it, his gaze darkening like the sky before a storm. "Good, let him feel it more." As Calvin stepped out, his phone vibrated a text from an unnamed number, just one line. He's starting to suspect the kid. Calvin knew who had sent it, and he understood he had to move faster, before Rico turned on Ethan. Because even if that boy was one of them, Claire had seen something different in him, and if a spark of light still lived inside, Calvin would not let it be extinguished. Not this time. Not while he was here. Not while the darkness itself had begun to tremble before its own return. Ethan sat alone in the car, windows rolled up, the engine long dead, though he made no move to leave. The cheap watch on his wrist ticked past 4 a.m., the sky outside still thick with darkness, punctured only by the distant glimmer of a few freight trucks passing along the industrial road. He picked up his phone for the 10th time since leaving the warehouse, scrolled through his inbox, then let it fall onto the passenger seat as if waiting for someone to message before he changed his mind. Then it buzzed. No name, just a string of numbers. The first text was short, yet it sent a chill slicing down his spine. "Ethan, your sister's name is Sarah Louise King, 17 years old, stage 3 kidney failure, receiving treatment at Mercy Medical Center in Kenner." Ethan's breath quickened. He looked around instinctively, certain someone was watching. His hand trembled as he opened the next message. "I'm not the police. I'm not your enemy. But if you don't get out soon, Rico will kill you to shut you up." Ethan typed back, fingers hammering the screen. "Who are you?" The reply came instantly. "I'm the man who once made Rico leave New Orleans in 36 hours for touching one of mine. And he's made that mistake again." Ethan read the line over and over. "One of mine, that person, Claire." He sank back into the seat, mind spinning. He had suspected it from the start, the way Claire spoke of her husband, the calm in her eyes amid chaos, the faith that didn't shake. She wasn't afraid because she knew. And the man she knew was the one texting him now. Another message arrived, this time with an image: Sarah, sitting in a hospital chair, IV in her arm, smiling as best she could. Below it, a final line: "Help me get Claire out safely. I'll cover your sister's treatment for life." Ethan bent forward, hands gripping his head. He didn't know how the man got that photo, didn't know who he really was, but one thing he was sure of: the man wasn't bluffing. Not the kind who made empty promises while others drowned in debt. Not the kind who would let his wife be tied up in a warehouse and do nothing. Ethan closed his eyes. He thought of Sarah, of the nights standing at the hospital door watching her sleep after dialysis, of the promise he'd made to their mother before she died: "I'll take care of her, whatever it takes." He thought of Claire's eyes not begging, but quietly trusting him with a chance. He couldn't let that slip away, couldn't pretend he didn't know what was happening. Ethan opened his eyes, picked up the phone and typed, "I'll help." The final message flashed back. "There's a camera at the side entrance of the warehouse. Noon today. Only you and Claire. No one else. Don't be stupid." Ethan read it, erased the entire thread, pulled out the phone battery, and tossed both into the river as he crossed the bridge. He needed time to prepare. One last time, then he'd be free. When he returned to the warehouse, Mike was outside smoking, eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. He shot Ethan a glare. "Where the hell were you?" Ethan replied quickly, voice steady as if rehearsed 100 times. "Buying medicine for your sister." Mike gave a short, bitter laugh, exhaling smoke into Ethan's face before turning away. Ethan watched him, heart pounding. Only a few more hours, then everything would change. There would be no going back. But he accepted that for Sarah, for himself, and for the woman who had seen the faint light still flickering inside him when everyone else saw only a criminal. Rain had been falling since noon, a fine mist weaving a gauzy curtain over the corrugated roof of the warehouse, each drop tapping like impatient fingers on the door of fate. Inside, Claire sat pressed against the cold wall, eyes wide open in the dimness, sleepless through the long night. She didn't know what would happen, only that something had changed in the look Ethan gave her before leaving that morning. In his eyes there had been something resolved, the shadow of a choice with no return. And exactly as her intuition warned, at 12:13 the metal door opened again, not with Mike's brute clang or barked orders, but softly, cautiously. Ethan stepped in wearing a thick hooded jacket, hands in pockets, hood low over half his face. He shut the door behind him and moved quickly toward her. "Get up," he whispered, slicing through her wrist ties with a small utility blade hidden in his sleeve. Claire blinked, asked nothing, only nodded. She stood, moving gingerly, her legs numb after nearly 3 days confined in the same position. Ethan handed her another jacket, a pair of cheap sunglasses, and a small bag containing crackers, water, and an old burner phone still inactive. "The west gate's clear for 10 minutes. I cut the alarm line," Ethan said, his voice fast but steady. "Once you're out, turn left and go half a kilometer. There's a silver pickup by the roadside. It's unlocked. The key's under the seat." Claire looked at him, eyes glistening. "Are you sure?" Ethan nodded, a strange seriousness in his face, the look of someone who'd already accepted losing everything for one right decision. "They'll notice within 15 minutes. I'll stay to buy time. Just get to the rendezvous at the East Dock. His people are waiting." Claire froze. Calvin contacted you? He knows everything. Even about Sarah," Ethan said, smiling faintly for the first time. "He doesn't kill innocents, but he won't spare anyone who touched you. I think you're the only reason he came back." Claire gripped Ethan's hand tightly. "Thank you, not just for saving me, but for not letting the dark swallow you whole." Ethan nodded, lowered his head slightly, and eased the door open. "Go, don't look back." Claire pulled the coat tight, lifted the hood, and slipped into the rain that fell without pause. Every stride was a heartbeat, every breath a tremor in her throat. She didn't know who might be watching from the shadows, only that she had to keep going, step by step, without stopping. At the grassy verge she found the old silver pickup waiting as if it had been there forever. She climbed in, her hands shaking as she slid the key into the ignition. The engine growled to life, no alarms, no pursuit, no shouts behind her. Not yet. She drove like someone who had never driven before but whose eyes never left the road ahead. Pools of water glimmered with dull reflections of gray sky, trees sliding past her window like silent witnesses to a quiet, desperate escape. When she reached the East Dock, another car was waiting. A man leaned against the hood, cap brim low, hands in his pockets. As she stopped, he stepped forward, opened the passenger door. Claire barely had time to react before he spoke, his voice low, steady, unmistakably familiar. "Don't worry, I'm taking you to him." Claire nodded. No questions, no confirmation needed. She knew Calvin had arranged everything. Behind each step she'd taken, he had cleared the path in silence. And now, with freedom within reach and only minutes between them, she knew the storm was nearly over, but the ground would never be peaceful again. Those who had dragged Calvin Reynolds back out of the dark were about to learn the simplest, most expensive lesson of all. No one touches what is his, and walks away unscathed. The black car rolled to a stop along the dirt road leading into the forest southeast of Baton Rouge, where the city lights dissolved behind thick trees and mist hung like thin smoke over the night. Claire sat in the back seat, her heart beating unevenly as the man beside her opened the door and motioned for her to step out. No one was waiting. No headlights. No voices. Only the smell of wet earth, the hum of insects, and a silence that felt arranged. Then, from the darkness, a man emerged, slow, steady, as though he moved not by steps but by the quiet pull of breath itself. Claire knew that gait before she saw his face. Her heart clenched, tears spilling without reason. Calvin stopped a few paces away. He said nothing, didn't open his arms, just looked at her for a long moment, his eyes tracing every bruise, every breath, as if he could not yet believe she stood before him, alive, after those days of hell. Claire moved first, without hesitation, closing the distance and falling into his arms as if she'd been waiting all her life for that single instant. Calvin held her, crushing her to him until she could feel the fierce rhythm of his heart, his breath hot against her rain-soaked hair. For several minutes neither spoke. They simply stood there in the still forest night, as if time itself had paused to grant them this reprieve. When he finally loosened his hold, he looked into her eyes, and for the first time since her abduction, she saw something stronger than fury restraint. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough and deep as wind through pine. Claire nodded, though tears kept falling. "Ethan helped me. He's not like the others." Calvin nodded once. "I know. That's why he's still alive." His gaze shifted past her, momentarily cold, as though measuring the distance between himself and the men who had dared to touch what he loved. "Claire," he said slowly, "I've already planned how to erase every link in Rico's network. I could end it in one night." She placed her hand on his chest. "But you didn't." Calvin met her eyes, and within them was the quiet wreckage of a war he had already put out. "Because of you," he said. "You told me once if I came back just to take revenge, I'd lose myself forever, and I couldn't make you live beside that kind of man, even if I saved you." Claire squeezed his hand. "I don't need a hero. I just need you to be Calvin, the man who gave up everything to live a peaceful life with me." He nodded gently, then bent to kiss her forehead. "We're going home," he whispered, "and no one will ever take you from me again." Claire rested her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in days her heart stopped trembling. They walked back to the car, fingers entwined. Behind them, the sky began to pale. The forest thinned, and the sounds of night retreated before the first breath of morning. But inside them, fear had no home left. They had found each other after everything, and this time, no matter how deep the darkness, they would walk through it, together. In less than 48 hours after Claire was rescued, whispers that no one would officially confirm, yet everyone in the underworld believed began to shiver through every corner, from Baton Rouge to the southern border of Texas. They did not come from newspapers. There were no videos or public images, only fragmentary rumors and breathless whispers passed hand to trembling hand in the dark. One of Rico's shipments was intercepted the moment it hit the dock. No one could say how, only that the container had been sealed with a strange mark. 3 clawed slashes carved across a white mask, etched into the steel door. Another warehouse burst into flame in the night, though alarms and guards had been functioning, and on a scorched wall someone had sprayed in blood-red paint, "Don't touch what belongs to me." The following night, the accounts of 3 of the 7 principal financiers, supporting Rico's operation, were frozen, and the money vanished without a trace. One of his men tried to call for help from New York, but the signal roared into static, and on the other end came a familiar, cold exhale, a sound the old-timers who had heard it before knew was not the voice of a threat so much as the voice of the man who had always ended games before they began. Calvin Reynolds, the ghost of New Orleans, had returned, needing neither public face nor gunfire. Each of his moves cut like a whispering blade through Rico's lines of supply and survival. Mike, the man who once screamed orders through the operations, simply disappeared. Rumor said he was hiding locked inside a container at the Western Yard, trembling with 2 guns and no bullets. Another of Rico's lieutenants was found in the road, clothes intact, unscarred, but psychologically shattered, repeating only, "I saw him. I saw him." Major suppliers who had long looked the other way on shady deals began to turn away, severing every tie to Rico and his crew. Burner phones used to run the network rang endlessly, and no one dared answer. Then, at midnight on the 3rd night, Rico found an unsigned letter slipped into his locked private room. No one knew how it had been delivered. Inside was a single sheet of white paper with a simple line in black ink. "This time I spare you, because you touched her before you could harm her. There will be no second time. What belongs to me is mine forever. You are not allowed to touch." No signature, only 3 deep gouges forming the shape of a mask beneath the line. Rico flung the note into the stove, but the flames could not burn the nightmare that had taken root in his mind. His entire apparatus, finance, shipping, personnel, protection networks crumbled in less than a week. There was no bloodshed, yet fear seeped into every breath, every mouse click, every step taken at night, and the underworld understood that no warrant and no sentence could trump Calvin's warning. People stopped speaking his name with contempt. Some called him legend, others said he had become something more than human, a symbol of a boundary no one must cross, especially the boundary marked by Claire's name. From then on, whenever anyone spoke of harming innocents to achieve some end, there was always a whisper in reply: "Beware the darkness. Someone there is listening." Rico had not slept for 3 nights. Every time he closed his eyes, a face without features rose out of the dark, the cold, ash-gray eyes cutting through every layer of disguise. It felt as though Calvin needed no gun, no army. His will alone could bring down an empire like a sandcastle under a rising tide. Every call returned a busy tone. Every plea for help met silence. His most loyal men had either vanished, fled, or severed all contact. Now Rico was alone, a wounded animal stumbling through the maze he had built himself. He drove through the night, changing cars 3 times in less than 10 hours, finally stopping at an empty gas station on the outskirts of Hammond, believing he was safe. But panic makes fools of men. When a patrol officer approached to ask about the unlicensed car, Rico flinched, an instinct twisted into something irreparable. He pulled his gun, dragged the officer inside the convenience store, pressed the barrel to the man's head while the young cashier behind the counter froze in terror. The world went still. Sirens wailed minutes later. A tactical unit sealed off the area. Red and blue lights flashed against the grimy glass, painting the scene in suffocating tension. Rico was no longer a kingpin, just a desperate man cornered. He shut off the power, pulled down the shutters, and held the officer and cashier hostage, shouting hoarsely for a getaway car, for cash, for a chance to live that he already knew was gone. Outside, negotiators tried to stall for time, confused how a man once feared for orchestrating million-dollar deals could fall this low, this fast. Then, something unexpected happened. As a negotiator lifted the loudspeaker, a woman's voice came from behind the line of police. No one recognized her until the floodlights caught her face, Claire. She wore a gray coat, her hair tied back, her gaze steady and unnervingly calm. Officers moved to stop her, but she spoke quietly. "Let me try. If he loses control, the hostages die first, but I know how to end this." Moments later, her voice echoed through the speaker, gentle but firm. "Rico, it's me, Claire. You don't have to do this. No one here wants to kill you. But if you keep going, every road closes, even the one that leads out alive." Inside, Rico froze. He had never imagined she would appear again, much less face him now. "Why are you here?" he shouted, his grip tight on the gun, though his eyes wavered. "Because I believe people aren't meant to be devoured by their own mistakes," Claire replied. "Because I once saw a man choose to walk out of the dark to forgive when he had every reason to destroy. And I think, if Calvin could change, maybe, so can you." Rico laughed, the sound breaking into madness, then roared. "I'm not him. There's no one waiting for me. I don't have a Claire." Claire was silent for a long moment. Then she said, each word slow, clear, "But if you put the gun down now, you can still have one thing a chance. Not freedom, but an ending without blood. A beginning, even if it comes late." For the first time since the nightmare began, Rico felt small. In Claire's eyes there was no contempt, no fear, only quiet compassion. His fingers slackened. The gun fell to the floor with a hard metallic crack that sounded like a final period. The officer crumpled but lived. The cashier sobbed, and in that instant, Rico finally understood. The name that haunted the underworld was feared not for how many men he killed, but because he always knew when to stop. Claire stepped forward into the light, her shoulders trembling but her stride unwavering. She hadn't saved Rico, she had simply given him the same chance Calvin once received, and that was enough to make the darkness pause. The police handcuffed Rico and put him into the transport van, but by procedure they were to take him to the holding station before transferring him to the county courthouse. No one noticed the second black vehicle with no plates that trailed them like a shadow, its speed steady and patient, and inside it sat Calvin, silent and cold, eyes fixed on every motion of the car carrying the man who had dared touch Claire. Though Rico had surrendered, and the town sighed in relief at the lack of further bloodshed, Calvin felt no ending. Some debts cannot be settled by law, and there are boundaries that, once crossed, admit only one form of reckoning. When the police cruiser turned onto the timber road leading to the wood yard near the western forest, an area abandoned after the big blaze a year ago, Calvin's car lunged, cutting across the intersection to block the cruiser's path. Another SUV flung itself in from behind to box the escort in, and in an instant the convoy was split apart. 4 men in black, masked, moved out and neutralized the 2 escort officers without firing a shot. Calvin opened the cruiser's rear door and hauled Rico out himself. The man resisted weakly, bewildered until he was dragged to the center of the timber stacks beneath floodlights that made the night look like day. Wind scoured the piled logs, dust rising in choking clouds like smoke. And in that eerie arena, Calvin faced him, expression unreadable, a loaded pistol in his hand. Rico stood trembling, knees beginning to fail. I let go of the gun. I didn't kill anyone. She's alive. He stammered. Calvin gestured for silence. You touched her. You bound her. You threatened the life of the person I swore to protect with everything I have. You think an apology is enough? Rico panted, sweat cutting through the cold night. I was a fool. I was wrong. But if you kill me, you become what you once were, don't you? You stain yourself again. Claire will never forgive you. Calvin stepped closer as if each footfall was a hammer blow to Rico's chest, raised the gun until the muzzle rested against his forehead. I don't need Claire's pardon. I need the world to remember. No one is allowed to harm her. No one. Rico closed his eyes, braced for the shot, when a clear voice rang across the yard, stronger than the night wind. Calvin, stop! Claire stepped into the light, her eyes no longer wild but resolute. She did not rush to seize him, or wail and beg. She stood and faced the husband who had once left the dark for her, and now stood at the threshold of return. If you pull the trigger, you win. But you lose me. Calvin did not turn immediately. His grip tightened, body taut like a trapped predator. He deserves to die, Claire. Yes, she answered without hesitation. He deserves to die, but you do not deserve to become a killer. The wind slid through, carrying the scent of old ash from the previous fire, like a reminder of the past they had left behind. At last, Calvin lowered his hand. The pistol clattered to the ground with a dry finality that echoed between the timber stacks. He looked at Claire, eyes rimmed red but without tears. I meant not to stop, he whispered. Then I heard your voice. Claire stepped forward and took his hand. I am always here, Calvin. I am the place you return to, not the place to vent your fury. Rico collapsed, hardly daring to believe he still breathed. Calvin glanced at him once more, then turned and walked away with Claire in silence. The black car waited, and when its door closed, the fierce chapter ended without another drop of blood. Even though Calvin did not fire, the message he left that night proved louder than any bullet. Love is not weakness. It is the reason the strongest among us know when to put down their hands. Rico was brought back to the detention center in a state no word could quite define, not wounded, not exactly terrified, but silent to the point of paralysis, as though every sound inside him had been strangled at its source. He asked nothing, shouted nothing, didn't struggle as he had in the first days. He simply sat there, still, under the cold fluorescence of the interrogation room, facing 2 detectives who were reading out charges of kidnapping, smuggling, threats against law enforcement, and organized crime. They waited for a reaction, but he only stared at his hands, his left forefinger still streaked with the dry blood from the scuffle before his capture. He felt no pain. What he felt was emptiness. Nothing changed until Claire walked into the room. She had asked to see him once, neither at Calvin's urging nor out of curiosity or vengeance, but for something she couldn't explain rationally. A part of her compassion refused to close until she looked at Rico one last time. The detective allowed it, on the condition that guards remained outside. Claire sat across from him, her hand resting lightly on the cold steel table. He didn't look up right away, yet she could tell he had felt her presence from the moment she entered. The air between them was taut as a wire, not with hatred, but with all the things that had never been spoken. Claire began first, her voice gentle, as if speaking to an old acquaintance rather than the man who had dragged her into a nightmare. She didn't ask why, didn't accuse, didn't demand answers. She simply described a rainy night the night she was taken, and the fear in Ethan's eyes, the moment she realized that not all of them were entirely lost. Sometimes, she said, what drives people into darkness isn't choice, but the absence of an exit. Rico remained silent, but his hands trembled. Claire went on to speak of Calvin not as the ghostly legend whispered about in back rooms, but as a man who rose early each morning to make coffee for his wife, who had set the knife down to learn gardening, who once believed himself unworthy of forgiveness but still dared to take her hand when she offered it. I don't think you were bad from the beginning, Claire said, her voice almost a whisper. I think you just stayed lost for too long and forgot you once had another direction. Rico lifted his head for the first time. His eyes were rimmed red, the skin beneath them hollow as if he hadn't slept for months. You're not afraid of me? Claire shook her head. I'm afraid of losing the part of people that can still come back. I'm afraid I'm not strong enough to keep the man I love from drowning in anger, but I'm not afraid of you anymore, because I see in you something you've been too tired to face the exhaustion of pretending to be harder than you are. Rico looked at her for a long moment, then bowed his head, covering his face with both hands. His shoulders began to shake uncontrollably. The sound of his crying was quiet but heavy, thick with pain and near despair. Claire said nothing more. She only sat there, waiting, letting him finish. When he finally raised his head again, his eyes were bloodshot, his voice rough and low. I'll confess, he said. I'll take it all. I don't want to run anymore. Claire nodded, so slightly it was almost invisible, yet inside she felt something lift, as though a weight of years had fallen away. She stood, turned, and walked out without looking back. Rico watched her go, and in his gaze there was no hatred, left only a faint, flickering light among the ruins. And in that fleeting moment he understood. Sometimes the only thing that can stop a monster is not the blade that hunts it, but the mercy of the one it thought was weakest. 3 months after the Hammond arrest, the Louisiana State Court officially sentenced Rico Hernandez to life imprisonment without parole, closing one of the most consequential trials to strike the underworld in nearly a decade. The proceedings took place behind closed doors, no reporters, no cameras, only the judge, attorneys, and those directly involved. Rico did not resist, did not argue. He stood upright, eyes fixed on the judge, as though it were his final attempt to preserve what little dignity remained. He did not beg. When asked for last words, he spoke only once. I deserve this. But someone gave me the chance not to die in hatred. No one pressed for explanation. None was needed. Yet those who witnessed it would never forget the moment a man who had once spread terror ended in silence, not with defiance or grandeur, but in surrender to the fragment of humanity still left in him. Mike, the former head of the group's armed operations, was captured in a cheap Arkansas motel while attempting to flee the country. He offered no fight, though arrogance lingered on his face. Still, with Rico's testimony and the weight of corroborating evidence, Mike received 25 years for multiple charges, including conspiracy to kidnap and illegal arms trafficking. Logan, the financier who had managed the dirty money, was also indicted and sentenced to 18 years, after investigators found hundreds of emails and virtual accounts tied to Rico's network. He cooperated for leniency, but the sentence remained severe. One by one, the rest of the organization fell. Some fled. Some were extradited. Authorities declared it one of the fastest and least violent takedowns in years, thanks largely to confidential intelligence from an unnamed source. Ethan was different. Summoned as a witness, his records revealed that he had directly aided Claire's rescue, supplying inside data that exposed Rico's storage sites and shipment routes. Claire's testimony carried weight, but it was the audio log of his exchange with Calvin, one verified copy submitted straight to the prosecutor's office, that proved Ethan had been coerced at first and later turned to the right side. The court acquitted him but required 2 years of community rehabilitation under probationary supervision. On the day of his release from court, Ethan met Claire on the stone steps behind the building. She said nothing, simply handed him a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note and a payment card for Mercy Hospital, covering 2 full years of Sarah's treatment. Ethan stood motionless for a long time, then broke down not from gratitude alone, but because for the first time in his life, he knew what it meant to be trusted. For Sarah, everything changed as well. Her health improved under a new treatment plan, and she was transferred to a better recovery center. She wrote a letter to Claire and Calvin, calling them the people who gave not only my brother but our whole family a second chance. Calvin never appeared in any courtroom. He moved silently behind every decision, as he always had, wordless, but undeniable. And when it was all over, people said the ghost of New Orleans had returned once, not to kill, but to save. Then he vanished again, as if he had never existed, leaving behind a lesson the underworld would not forget. Some wrongs are paid for in blood, but others are redeemed through compassion, if one has the courage to choose what is right, even at the final moment. One early autumn morning, as the sun rose just above the eastern tree line and the first golden leaves drifted down onto the eaves, Claire unlocked the door of her little diner on the corner of Orleans Street, just as she always had. The brand new open sign hung neatly in the freshly polished window pane, spotless and bright. After weeks of repairs following the vandalism, Claire's Corner finally reopened, not only with new furniture and paint, but with a sense of true renewal. The bar counter had been replaced with walnut wood instead of the old marble top, the soft amber lights adjusted to a glow gentle enough for the older patron's eyes, and a small pot of lavender now sat on the windowsill, a quiet gift Calvin had left in the kitchen on reopening morning. Claire stood behind the counter in a beige apron, pouring coffee for her first customer of the day, old Mr. Grant, who had been coming there for years. The elderly man smiled, his deep southern drawl raspy but kind. "Miss Claire, this place been missin' the smell of coffee for weeks. Felt like I didn't have a home to come back to." Claire smiled, her eyes warm. "Me too, Uncle Grant. It's like a part of me went quiet when the diner was closed." From the kitchen came the soft sizzle of a pan, Calvin, carefully flipping strips of bacon. He spoke little, focusing on every small task. Though Claire had told him he didn't need to help, that they could just hire someone new, Calvin insisted on cooking the very first breakfast served since the reopening. "I've broken enough things in my life," he said. "At least let me make a few good ones again." No one in the diner, not even the longtime regulars, knew who he truly was. To them, the silver-haired man with the quiet eyes was just Mr. Cal, the one who wiped tables spotless, carried plates of pancakes with care, and never forgot the extra brown sugar packet for the elderly lady who always sat by the window with her decaf. Their lives no longer echoed with gunfire, no longer paused for calls at midnight, no longer hid the sound of footsteps in dark hallways. They had built new habits instead, cleaning the diner together at closing, sharing late lunches after the crowd was gone, watching old cooking shows on the small wall-mounted TV, and sometimes simply sitting side by side, watching the rain roll down the window without saying a word. One evening, as Claire was folding napkins, Calvin approached from behind and set a small ring box on the counter. "We're already married," she said, surprised but her eyes soft with emotion. "I know," he replied with a faint smile, "but that was before you knew all of me. Today, if you still choose to wear this ring, it means you choose every part of who I am, even the dark ones." Claire didn't answer with words. She opened the box, slipped the new ring on, and squeezed his hand gently. "I never chose just part of you." Outside, the scent of fresh pastry drifted through the corner of the street. New faces began stopping by, drawn by word of mouth. Old patrons returned just to say, "Glad you're back." And through every coming and going, Claire's Corner remained what it had quietly become, a place that didn't just serve food, but held together pieces of memory stitched back with love, forgiveness, and scars that had finally healed. And there, in that small diner on Orleans Street, Claire and Calvin no longer needed to run. They only needed to live peacefully, simply, and honestly, as the people they had chosen to become. One quiet weekend afternoon, when the sunlight began to stretch across the old brick steps in front of Claire and Calvin's little house, a soft knock sounded at the door. Claire was in the kitchen brewing tea, so Calvin went to open it. Standing on the porch was a young woman in her early 20s, slender, with neatly tied brown hair and clear eyes that carried a quiet depth. She held a bouquet of sunflowers and a small bag in her hands. "My name is Sarah," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Ethan's sister." Claire heard the name from the kitchen and stepped out, her fingers still damp with tea. The moment their eyes met, no explanation was needed. Claire instantly knew this was the girl Ethan had risked his freedom to save. Sarah smiled, shy, emotional, and offered the flowers. "I just wanted to come and say thank you," she said softly. "Not only for what you did for my brother, but for me too. If it hadn't been for you, for the things Ethan told me about you, I think I would have lost faith in people long ago." Calvin invited her inside. The house was simple and warm, filled with the quiet calm of two lives finally at peace. They sat around the small wooden table in the dining room as Claire poured hot tea into 3 white porcelain cups. Sarah reached into her bag and took out a small envelope. "This is a letter," she said. "I wrote it while I was in the hospital. It's for both of you, but I wanted to give it in person, not through the mail." Claire opened the envelope. Neat, delicate handwriting filled the page, soft lines written with trembling emotion. In the letter, Sarah told her story, from the day she was diagnosed, to when her brother began slipping into darkness to pay for her treatment, to the day Ethan finally called after so long just to say one sentence: "Claire and Calvin changed my life." "Tell Defrayed." She wrote that at the time, She didn't understand. But after leaving the hospital, after hearing the whole story, she cried for hours, because she realized that there were still people in this world who chose to forgive, who chose to give, even when they had every reason to seek revenge. Sarah wrote that she didn't know who they once were, but who they had become now. That was what she respected most. I think, the final line read, some people enter our lives as reminders that light never disappears. It's only hidden by wounds that haven't healed yet. I wasn't just saved by medicine, but by your existence. Thank you for not giving up on each other. Thank you for not giving up on this world. Claire set the letter down, her eyes burning but her lips curved in a quiet smile. Calvin, who had remained silent the entire time, simply nodded to Sarah. Thank you, he said, his voice deep and sincere. You don't owe anyone anything, but if one day you meet someone lost the way Ethan once was, remember today and help them see the light, just as you have. Sarah nodded, her voice trembling. I will. By the time she left, the sky had turned gold with evening. Claire stood at the doorway, watching the young woman walk down the cobbled street. The breeze carried the scent of herbal tea and the rustle of leaves whispering softly. Calvin came up behind her, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders. They said nothing, but in their eyes was a shared stillness, a peace earned through storms. They both knew. Sometimes a story doesn't end with a gunshot, nor with vengeance. It ends with a thank you deep enough to heal old wounds, strong enough to begin a new life. That night, the sky was clear and endless. A thin ribbon of silver moonlight draped across the rooftops, glinting through the kitchen window where Claire and Calvin were preparing dinner together. The small kitchen was neat and orderly, every utensil in its proper place, as if each object carried its own quiet meaning, habits built over time and steadied by patience. Calvin stood at the stove, gently stirring a pan of sautéed vegetables, while Claire set plates and silverware on the oak table darkened by years of use. The scent of butter melting in the pan drifted through the air, mingling with a faint trace of ginger from the soup simmering nearby. Nothing hurried them. No one urged the other on. Everything unfolded slowly, peacefully, exactly in rhythm with the life they had chosen. When the final dish was placed on the table, Calvin poured 2 glasses of red wine, not heavy, just enough to warm the soul. They sat facing each other, and in the golden light between them, there was something both familiar and new. Claire smiled, lifting her chopsticks with gentle grace, and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. I never thought we'd have a night like this, not after everything. Ass. Calvin looked up, a flicker of remorse still lingering in his eyes, though the old weight of guilt had softened. Neither did I, he said quietly. But you never gave up. You're the one thing I've ever been certain would never turn away from me. Claire nodded without a word. She ladled soup into his bowl and set it gently before him. Do you ever fear the past will come back? She asked, her voice tender but curious. Calvin thought for a while before setting down his fork. Sometimes, he admitted. I still dream about those nights, the names of the ones who didn't make it, the faces I couldn't save. But then I wake up and see you lying beside me, your hand on my chest, like you're keeping my heart in rhythm. And in that moment, I know the past doesn't own me anymore. Claire was silent for a long time, then laid her hand over his. I don't need a perfect man, she said softly. I just need someone who knows he isn't perfect but keeps trying every day. And I know that man is you. Calvin's gaze gentled. In that quiet, it no longer felt like 2 survivors sitting at a table. It was 2 souls who had finally found each other in a vast and restless world. I promised I'd never let the darkness touch you again, he said, voice low and steady. And I've kept that promise. But will you promise me one thing? Claire tilted her head. What is it? Promise me, he said with a faint smile, that if you ever see me slipping back toward that darkness, you'll tell me. Don't hesitate to wake me even in the middle of the night. I need you to be the balance for both of us. Claire smiled back and nodded. I promise. But you have to promise, too, that if I ever fall, you'll be the one to lift me up, without asking why. Always, Calvin replied, tightening his hold on her hand. Outside, the night breeze swept through the trees, their rustling leaves sounding like music beneath the soft glow of the moon, a quiet accompaniment to a promise that didn't need to be shouted. Words were no longer necessary. Their presence alone, shared in the simplest of moments, was the clearest answer to everything they had endured. And when the meal was over, when they cleared the table and washed the dishes in familiar silence, the space between them no longer belonged to 2 people who had merely survived the dark. It belonged to two hearts, living fully, in a place where the light had finally come home. There is something not everyone understands, that sometimes the people who have lived in darkness are the ones who cherish the light the most. Calvin was no longer the name whispered through the underworld with a mixture of fear and reverence, no longer the ghost haunting the sinful corridors of New Orleans, no longer the man who had to harden himself to survive in a world where love was a luxury. Now, he was simply Calvin, the quiet husband who stood at the stove each morning, wiped the tables each night, watered the garden with his wife in the soft light of dusk, and wordlessly rested his hand on her shoulder whenever her eyes drifted somewhere far away. And Claire, the small but steadfast woman, was not just the one who had been saved, but the one who had saved Calvin from the darkest part of himself. Their love was not loud or adorned with grand gestures. It was built from small, ordinary moments. A touch at the right time, a look that said enough, a trust so deep it no longer needed words. The little diner still opened its doors each day. The old regulars were so familiar now, they could help themselves to sugar for their coffee. Newcomers were always greeted by Claire's gentle smile and warm eyes. None of them knew about Calvin's past, and truly, there was no need to. Because at this point in life, the only thing that mattered was that he was living with decency and peace, just as the woman he loved had once wished for him. In those quiet days, Calvin was sometimes pulled back by fragments of memory, a news report about old cases he'd once been part of, a familiar face passing on the street. But instead of fear or regret, he viewed them simply as distant traces, proof that a person can change, if they truly wish to, and that sometimes, what it takes to save a life isn't a grand second chance, but a hand extended at the right moment. The story of Calvin and Claire is not a fairy tale. It is a real fragment of life where people fight not only against the world, but against themselves. It reminds us that everyone has a past, yet no one is forever defined by it. That forgiveness, compassion, and love, no matter how small, can become a light guiding those who once lost their way. And what about you? How did you feel after hearing this story? Did something within it resonate with you? Have you ever judged someone by what they once were, before seeing who they are trying to become? We would love to hear your thoughts truly, from the heart. Share your reflections in the comments below. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, and share the video so that more people can feel the warmth of its message. Each day, we bring you stories filled with emotion, depth, and inspiration, reminders of the goodness still alive in this world. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Wishing you good health, peace, and joy in every day of your life. And may you always keep a little light within your heart no matter where you are, what you do, or what you've been through. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.